Hi guys, my name's Andrew Branch. I teach in the Media and Journalism department at UEL. My teaching and my research focuses on the media and creative industries. So in the broadest sense, I'm interested in how those industries operate. And I guess the kind of key question for me is about how those industries can best reflect the society that they serve. So I'm interested in questions of ethics, but also questions of access. So, you know, which groups make up those industries, and by implication, what impact that has on content.
I went to UEL. I studied European Studies and Italian. So I'm a photographer, and I make quite long-term projects, usually getting to know people over a year or 2 years, and they end up in exhibitions and become books and go into media. And so I've spent the last few years working a lot with people with learning disabilities. But this new project is about single parents, and I'm a single parent myself. And this will go to Museum of the Home in London, and then up to Liverpool, then to the Arnolfini. And, you know, I think in terms of this question of diversity, if you misrepresent single parents in the media, that leads to policies. You know, you present them as scroungers, and then you find when George Osborne wants to bring in a new policy that only gives benefits to 2 children, to your first 2 children, it's a very popular policy. And, you know, in the end, it's going to really hurt the 3rd child, the 4th child, and families in poverty. So it's really important that we represent single parents fairly. In fact, 75% of parents with 3 children work. And yet you still have this idea, if you speak to my parents' generation, that people with 3 children did it because they want to get a bigger house and more benefits. And now, you know, we have a benefit system built around fairness, not need. And this comes from how we present things in the media, I think. And so I'm following 7 people over about a year and a half, and following their story, getting to know them, and trying to present single parents. A quarter of families in the UK are single parents. It's not a minority group. It's 2.9 million people. So it's really important that we do this and show this work and talk about how life is for single parents in the UK.
Hi everyone, my name is Barbara Fu Zafira. I used to be a student at UEL. I studied creative fashion marketing, and now I am a creative in the creative industry. I was creative director, production designer, and stylist. So basically, I was the art director on this project. The whole project lasted like from the beginning of September until the 3rd week of October, really. So basically almost 2 months. We shot it in Slovenia. The idea of this project and the message we wanted to, with Amazon, we wanted to create an advert that was meaningful and represented really what everyone went through 2020 in regards to what happened with Black Lives Matter, the kill of George Floyd, and all these sort of things, and Corona. So we thought obviously the best idea was to tell a story, you know, but it wasn't just a story of a Black family, you know, it was a story of like hope and faith, realistically, you know, that everyone truly could feel related. So honored to be part of such project, because I think I'm kind of certain that it's one of the first time that the crew was mainly Black. Well, obviously there were like all sorts of pigmentation around, but Amazon really wanted to work with a lot of Black creative, and it was amazing because I've been working in this industry full as art director since I left uni. And I'm always the Black person on set majority of the time, and especially majority of the time I'm always the only female Black director. It was really nice, you know, to collaborate with a lot of different, you know, shade of Black and pigmentation and brown. It was so beautiful, and it was so beautiful to see this inclusivity. It was a very, 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 very special project, because first it's the global Christmas campaign, so it was, you know, it was shown everywhere in the world. but also because you know, there was the message behind it was, you know, was huge. Firstly, it says that no matter where you're coming from, whatever social background you come from, you can achieve any sort of dream. So you should never feel that you're not able to, you know, to become anything that you wish to be because of where you're coming from. And so I'm all about those messages. All of my work are around, you know, based on this sort of ethos. I did a commercial for Body Form, which talks about inclusivity, about women's, you know, of every shape and form. I worked on this set, especially in this commercial, with women with some different disability. So I had women without an arm, you know, with like a burnt face, and you know, obviously I had women of all pigmentation and all like sizes, you know. That was really, really beautiful. And I just worked on another commercial for TikTok, which I'm not certain when it's coming out that, because I think they filmed the editing just finished a couple of weeks ago.
Hi guys, I'm Michelle. I'm a third year journalism student, soon to graduate. I've done a bit of freelance work in between that time, or prior to that time. Found it really hard to get in the industry based on that alone. Hence why I went back to university. I won a Minority Writers Award for The Guardian, which allowed me then, after a few more successful pitches, to become recognised as a contributor to them. I've also featured in a BBC documentary called A Special Kind of Mum, because I'm a single parent with a disability, and people find that fascinating for some reason. And off the back of two of my articles published with The Guardian, they went on to be documentaries as the BBC approached them. I approached the sources, so I must have a good eye for a story, which hopefully will land me the job of my dreams. But yeah, that's me in a nutshell, and I look forward to the discussion.
Historically, one of the issues was, I think, about kind of self-exclusion, that you would get a kind of perception of, well, that's not for the likes of me. This is something that's done by other people and it looks fabulous, but it's kind of, you know, me, never, that kind of perception. So in a sense, historically, those people that ended up in those industries were never challenged, because the people who should have been challenging them were kind of saying, well, that's, you know, that's not for the likes of me. It seems, my perception is that that's changed. So I don't have a, you know, when I teach first year students, I don't have a problem trying to kind of encourage them to have aspirations. They've got amazing aspirations. So I just wondered whether you guys think there's been a bit of a shift, and that we're now in a position where, leaving aside the other challenges about how do you actually get into those, just in terms of aspiration, I'd love to hear from the other speakers about whether they think that, you know, that's the case.
2 points about that. I think there is a movement with Black Lives Matter that has allowed opening up maybe in that area, but there will always be other groups. So for example, I've done a lot of work with people with learning disabilities, and their voices are very seldom heard. They're a group that are underrepresented, therefore policies are made for them, not with them. You know, it's really interesting. There's one man that I worked with who has a learning disability, who's a mayor in York. He can actually act as a mayor, but he needs support. But imagine if we start to get more voices of people with learning disabilities. This is, again, a large group of the society. You know, it's over 2 million people, 2% of the UK. So there is, you know, there should be room to listen to those voices too. Even with single parents now, it's very hard to find work where you can work around childcare, and that hasn't been properly addressed. There should be a big movement around it. You know, I think, so this is Out of the Shadows. It's about people with learning disabilities going through the criminal justice system. And again, like, I tried to get people to speak for themselves as much as possible. It's also hard to go and find these people, to get people to start to talk. Like, we found Roy in a locked, secure prison. And he told his story, but no one had heard his story about how he had been abused for 4 years in a children's home, and he ended up in prison for 20 years. And he had stopped trying to tell his story because he hadn't been believed so many times. So I think we can think, oh, okay, we've solved this problem now. Now more women are being represented. Now people, but there are still people who are not represented. And I think there's still a structure in work that doesn't allow, for example, for single parents to always be able to get off work to go and pick up their kids, or to do more job sharing. There's a lot of work still to be done around job sharing, around making work possible for people when you're a single parent. I can tell you it's really hard to find jobs that you can fit around childcare, let alone holidays, or trying to get up the work ladder when you're not the person who can stay late. So I think there's more work to be done. For example, Danny here, he had been in prison all his life, and then now he's able to run this group himself called Working for Justice, and he goes into prisons and is very able to speak to the media. He goes into prisons, trains prison officers around. He has a learning disability himself, but he is able, because he has the best voice to do this, to now go in and speak to police officers, to courts about how to deal with people with learning disabilities. And as he says, we tell them to listen and to ask questions.
Polly, just to sort of push you a bit on what you just said, because I think what you were saying there about it's, you know, what stories get told is really important. You know, what stories do we hear about? But my question was more about, do you think that the people that are doing the kind of the creatives themselves, but do you think there's a sense in which those kind of people that want to tell those stories, not the stories themselves, but the people that want to make those stories get heard, this fabulous work that Barbara and Michelle are doing and you're doing, do you think that now there is that aspiration that is there, that it's not the case that they think, well, you know, I'd love to tell this important story about somebody else, but I don't feel equipped to? Or do you think that there is that? Because I think you started to talk about the barriers that were in place, and I was sort of trying to get a sense of whether the aspiration is there.
I don't think most people who I've worked with in that field feel like they can have the aspiration even to tell the story themselves, or to find work in newspapers, or to, but given support, it is possible.
Right, okay.
In regards to your question, Andrew, well, I think like maybe the new generation, because of social media, when you said the word entitled and then you correct yourself, I think actually they do think perhaps they're a little bit entitled of, you know, showing themselves, portraying themselves, but they're not necessarily aspiring to be anything that is actually greater than just, I don't know, like a presence on social media, you know. And perhaps like from my personal experience, my knowledge, like when I moved here, I did not fit with the Black community because I was too different in a way, you know, and it was quite bizarre because, or interesting, because in Italy, 19 years that I lived there, born and raised in the northern Italy, like I always felt that I was never really belonged there, although I went to the same school, I came from a good family, I spoke better than them, because obviously being Black, it was already a sort of disability, so I had to, you know, be the best in everything possible, you know. And once I moved to London, I was more accepted within the white community than my own community, you know. But then also, like in England, in London, you have the Caribbean community, you have the African community, you know, like it's very broad. But what happened when I began to work in the music industry, you know, the pop music industry, there was a lot of Black people, you know, and I understood why I was never really, I would never felt really belong in the Black community, because they told me, because, you know, like, although some of them now they work, you know, in this sort of creative industry and they're able to earn money, they still have this like old way mentality of the Caribbean and of just really be segregated in a way, you know. Although it's mixed, but they still have this sort of mentality to be very segregated. They still talk about gangs. I never spoke about gangs, but there were not really gang crime where I'm coming from. I come from a very posh places in the northern Italy, so there was never, I was never being put in front of such things, you know. So yeah, I think it's when you're coming from like a working class background and perhaps you know, maybe your parents obviously they wish for you to be the best, but then your surrounding are still like, oh, you know, you have to hang out with this in order to make this, you want some cash and stuff. Perhaps yes, you still think that you're not able or you not deserve such position, you know. So I think yeah, it depends. It really depends because with social media people act weirdly nowadays. It's more about showing what their possession and their bodies realistically than show any purpose of meaning, if I have to be honest with you. But yeah, I hope I answered your question without rambling too much.
Interesting question. So, my earlier sort of academic history at school, college, and my first attempt at uni was all very much social science based. So, I studied philosophy, sociology, psychology, all at A level, and then went on to sociology at uni. And so I was very interested in the study of people and why we behave the way we do, and our history and how we all sort of connect together as a puzzle. So that interested me at a very young age. But then after repeating these studies for so long, I've become a little bit bored of the same sort of material. But through the essay writing that we done monotonously, I realised actually I had a love and skill for writing. As a child, I always kept a journal and I loved to write poetry. And that was sort of like a private sort of hobby of mine for a long time. And so it wasn't until my early 20s, I'd say, that I sort of began to look at all my interests with more pride and piece them together with something that I would A, love doing and B, monetize. And I realized that actually, through the link of my writing ability and sociology, actually, I'm really interested in storytelling and the stories of others, particularly those like me who don't always get heard. Um, so I began to put more energy into that, and hence why I entered the minority writers competition with the Guardian. And with that and winning that, that then gave me the opportunity and the confidence to keep doing it and earn while doing it. So that's a bit about my story and where we started. And apologies because my son, I'm homeschooling, and my son asked me a question when you was calling my name, so I wasn't sure if he was on the same question or a different one. But going back to your initial question, Andrew, I think you're right in that young people and people in the talent pool have an enthusiasm, absolutely, and big aspirations when thinking about their career in the media. However, what I find is that I don't find the same level of enthusiasm with the media industry themselves. Yes, they do little bits and bobs like, oh, we've got an opening for BAME, and that's all great, but it just doesn't scream, we want you, we need you. It just seems tokenistic. I think what it is, I think you're very right in that people feel that they don't necessarily belong. So it's one thing to be inclusive, and it's another to really make people from different backgrounds feel they belong in this space, allow them to take up the space, and let them have autonomy over that space. Um, and I think if you like, I've had a bit of a taste of it myself as someone who's disabled, and it really does put you off. Like, I've been for many jobs, BBC, Channel 4, and most of these interviews were group interviews. And when I'd left, it seemed that all the other candidates flurried towards me. They're like, oh my God, I think you've got it because you owned the room. You really put your ideas on the table. Well done. Congratulations. So I left thinking, oh, if they think I've got the job, then I've got the job. But I didn't get the job. And so I feel that there's this elitist feel in the media industry that needs, like, they need to check themselves. They need to check their isms. They need to check their prejudice, and 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 maybe do some course on that themselves. And there's also my last point is that I think we need to change the pathways to the media industry, because I think this one pathway fits all thing just isn't working. The whole go to uni, hop on there, hop on a graduate scheme, then you're in. And it's just, that doesn't always work for everybody. And I think we need to get more creative with the pathway, a bit more variety there, which will allow for a bit more variety to end up in the newsroom itself.
Michelle, just a quick question about, I thought it's really interesting what you were saying about kind of social sciences, and then you sort of said, actually, but the real, as I heard it, actually the kind of real moment when I felt that I really owned this was when I could be kind of creative myself. Is your sense that maybe that's something that universities could do well to take on board? And maybe this is to Barbara and Polly as well, this sense in which the best way that students can engage with complex ideas and understand the world very broadly is through practice, rather than this more passive process of sitting there listening to a lecture, but actually kind of starting with the object, with the creativity, as it were. So with Barbara with the art direction, you, Michelle, with the writing, and then through that creativity address those broader issues. Do you think that's something that universities
Absolutely
could benefit from thinking a bit more critically about?
Oh God, yeah, absolutely. I think, you know what, I've learned a lot even through homeschooling myself. And, we try to we're trying to do things in this traditional way all the time, and it doesn't always connect. And that's the thing about storytelling as well. I think it's the same with teaching. You've got to be able to connect to your audience. And at the minute, there is a bit of a disconnect. I mean, lecturers are doing a fantastic job, and so are the students, especially at this time. But there is a slight disconnect, and I think we need to be real about it. And I think we need to meet people at their level. I mean, the world has changed, and we're in a virtual space. And we're doing CV still. Are we still doing that? Really, people are looking at your social media. You know, they're looking about what you're doing and what you're posting and how you're active. And I think if we really embrace that and incorporated that in our studies, and any sort of media study at uni, to really say, right, come, let's look at all your socials, let's see what you're doing and what your interests are and how we can help you put the best sort of foot forward there in your virtual footprint in the world, to leave your mark or to help you get employment. And I've even thought about, just in a real sense, of even using, like, the kids love TikTok so much, and I'm like, okay, I'm trying to teach my son, he doesn't look interested. Okay, let's use TikTok to do it. Then let's do an explainer on TikTok, and then it's a bit more exciting and they seem like they're more interested in doing it. So I think it would work both ways if that was incorporated in studies.
I think it's actually quite interesting what you just said, Michelle. But it still works also being in a traditional way, because, for like example, I always speak for like personal, like knowledge and things that I am certain of. Like, I was approached for a future films, and still, although they had my website and they have my social media, they still wanted a CV. So yes, we are living in a digital world, and we're moving towards more and more artificial intelligence in this certain way. However, when you get to, like, big position, job position, they still require you this like old way of presenting yourself, So I don't know, like, I personally think it's both, it's still both very relevant, because they will ask it, each time that I've been asked for a CV, I'm like, okay, well, you have my website, that's my CV realistically, because I do visual content. you know, but still, you know, they still want a piece of paper, you know. So yeah, I think, you know, we have to just be aware of the fact that all the old-fashioned way is still very relevant within the creative industry. I receive CV every single day of people, you know, and although I might actually, if I have to be honest with you, when I receive CV from people that want to work with me, want to assist me, blah, 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 and so on, I prefer to see their CVs, because on the CV, you would definitely know the experience that they have, like the factual experience, because perhaps the majority of the time, social medias are more the world that we want to be in, not necessarily what we truly live in, you know. It's not a case of a generalization of everyone, you know, but the majority of the people of, you know, of the new generation, the younger generation, I speak as I'm 250 years old, but I still think I'm very analog in the way I approach life. It's more a fake, it's more the fake world, you know. So it's really important to have CV, because you can still lie clearly, you know, you can lie anyway, you know, all the way through your life, well then, you know, if you wish so. But, you know, I think it's more pragmatic, it's more factual.
One of the kind of scholars that I'm really interested in, no longer with us, unfortunately, a French sociologist, Pierre Bourdieu. And very briefly, well, Barbara will know, but Michel, I'd love to hear your views on this. So essentially, Bourdieu says, look, you know, the way that people get on, maybe this is where we could shift the conversation to not just about what we want to do creatively, but how we get into those industries. And he says it's about, you know, recognizing the rules of the game. Okay, so he says that, you know, it's not enough that you know the rules of the game that you occupy. So I guess in Michel's example there, it's about being really familiar with social media and knowing kind of what works for you and your kind of social group, as it were. I know I'm being really crude in describing this, but it's also being aware of how other games are played, as it were. So when Barbara was talking about, actually, it's recognizing what's going on now, say for my generation or for the social group that I kind of identify with, but it's also recognizing that those other games are still in play. So in a sense, maybe the kind of the way that some of these barriers can be broken down is to kind of recognize the rules that are operating, because if you don't even recognize the rules that are operating, how can you challenge them in a way? So and I'd be really interested to hear what Michel and Polly think about this, because I think Barbara was right in a sense to say, yes, we want to be creative about the way that we express ourselves and the way that we're judged and evaluated, but we also shouldn't lose sight of those kind of, you know, the other rules that are in play. And I speak from the experience of teaching a lot of students at UEL, maybe just to finish on this anecdote, who are fantastically creative. They've got brilliant ideas, you know. I mean, what you were saying, Michel, about, you know, kind of TikTok as a way of kind of engaging complex ideas. They're way ahead of me in that respect. So the creativity and the energy is there. But what they need support on is just recognizing how do they then package that up, that talent up, in a way that is then going to be heard by people that are playing to a different set of rules. And those people that are playing to a different set of rules, you know, they exist, right? So there's all sorts of boring research that says lots of working class people don't get into the arts because they don't even get to the kind of interview stage. There's lots of research that says working class people are underrepresented, and I'm including BAME here as well. Lots of groups are underrepresented in the creative industries, not through a lack of talent, but because either self-exclusion or they're not quite in tune with the kind of rules that are in play. So I'd just be really fascinated to hear what you all thought about that.
I think on another point, it's also about trying to, ways of finding money. And it's interesting, I just had to do a massive Arts Council application for this project that I'm doing about single parents. And, you know, this is allowing me to show it in 3 museums across the country and do loads of workshops and to be able to shoot the story and to be able to have writers. But I promise you, if you ever tried to do an Arts Council application, so a friend of mine was the editor at Freeze, and she's just tried to do one, and she was just like, I mean, she ran a magazine. She knew how to do stuff like this. Can you imagine a young student trying to get through the Arts Council? It's impossible. So you also have to be able to game the system, like you say. You have to be able to work out how to do that. You have to be able to one of the things that I had to say in my application was that I'm representing the least, there's this wording you have to use. So how would I get the least represented into the most represented spaces? So I had to explain that. So how do I get people who are single parents, for example, into museums? Because otherwise it's a waste of time doing this work. Now, that's not to say that their questions are invalid, because actually some of them are valid. They're important. How will I reach my audiences? How will I engage people? All of these are actually important questions, because otherwise, why should they give me money to tell a story? But it's a minefield. You need help. You need, and if you haven't been to university, I don't know how you'd even begin to do that. Or if you haven't, if you don't have a lot of courage and wherewithal and help, and yeah.
It's a really poignant point you've made, because it is those sort of processes and rules that are in place, very fixed, to make stuff happen, like your project or a job application or anything. This sort of fixed style is what it excludes people. Like, you yourself found that application difficult. Now imagine you had a learning disability or cognitive disorder. You're going to find that even more difficult or impossible even. However, the project may well still be amazing, but you've hit that wall, and that's the first wall where you can't get in. And this is how you don't get in. Do you know what I mean? Because of those rules are so fixed. And I'm not saying there's not a place for analog. I think there is, because that application you did might work really well for somebody else. But I feel there does need to be more variety when it comes to applications, whether it's for the Arts Council or for a job application or getting into university. There just needs to be a bit more variety and choice to say, right, you can either upload your CV here or manually fill in the application form, or record a video of yourself, whatever you feel comfortable with that adheres to your skill set and your sensory experience. Then I think that would build the ramp that we need.
So one of the pictures that I showed you was a woman called Caroline. So I'm really interested in this question of getting people to take part in the story as much as possible. So I had been really struggling to photograph her. I don't know why, but visually the connection between us, I just found it really hard to photograph. I don't know exactly why. Anyway, I set this camera up in her house, and she started photographing herself, and she came alive. When her foster child and her daughter are in bed, she goes down to the kitchen and likes to clear all the cupboards. So I set up the lights in her kitchen, and she's got all the saucepans out of her cupboards. And I said to her, look, so it's a bit of a collaboration. If you get a sponge and have water, the flash will, you'll see the water really beautiful. So she lifts this sponge and the water's splashing, and she's surrounded by pots and pans. But I wasn't even in the room. She took that picture by herself completely. And so the whole story really came alive when I left her to it and I wasn't in the room. So I think, lots of people have let people photograph themselves before. But the nice thing about this project is, because COVID's made me do it in a way, it's almost like they've been given a stage, and then you leave people to it and they can take their own picture. It's really made the project come alive a bit more.
Barbara, could you talk us through the genesis of the Amazon advert? What was your kind of initial, what kind of got you motivated in terms of thinking about the kind of brief for that, or responding to the brief rather?
Well, when I received the treatment, I was like, well, this story was made for me, because I really related to the story. I thought that I was one of these, the little girl, perhaps, and so for me it was almost easy, because I knew that story very well, and so I didn't have to do anything else than just be myself. The majority of the work that I work on all the time, for example, I just got this new client, and what I do is that I have a chat with them, but I'm like a sponge and a psychologist, realistically, and I allow them just to express themselves, just to talk, just to visualize what they wish to be, or they would like to be, what they dare not to show to others. And once they explain all these things to me, they put it down. I always ask to present me like a mood board, so I see images also of their dreams. And then, after the chat in the mood board, I gather all the information, and I present another mood board with my understanding of what is the direction that we could go for, but it's always very honest. All my approach are very honest, very human, like I'm a blank canvas when I speak to a new client, when I get a new treatment. I just allowed all the information to really soak in me, and then I'm able, to kind of regurgitate them out, if you can, it's the right word. So yeah, I'm very, my approach in terms of art is very honest. Like I love humans behaviors. I was actually just thinking to get like an MA on psychology and business, and because I think everything is around understanding of people, truly. Also, when you said, about understanding the context and the rule, it's all about that. In order to be a lawyer, you have to understand what it means to be in that sort of context. Not just the written rules, but the majority of the time is the silent rule, the implicit rule in everything. And I think also because I am a person of color, born and raised in the Western society, so I always had to kind of really read those underlying messages rather than what they was actually said to me. And I think this also really what helped me to navigate like a little bit like the salt around everywhere, because it's not even about imposing your personality, but I'm always a good listener, firstly, I'm very humble in everything that I do. So, and then I make my move when it's the right time. So yeah, but also like in regards of taste, that you said, what define taste and or channel aesthetic. I think it's also, again, it really depends on where you're sitting on, because if we're talking about target, it's all about also target audience, because if I'm talking about my target, it's like 50 to 70, I don't know, bourgeois, then you know that the code is completely different. If you're speaking to 60s to 70s, working class people, it's all about understanding where you are at, and then you can convey your messages, I believe.
Well, that's fascinating, Barbara, because just that idea of we're always, or certainly I'm always trying to encourage students to kind of think against themselves. So just that idea of, they're the greatest storytellers of their own story, right? But actually, you also need to be aware of those other audiences, as you just said. So it's almost, so thinking against yourself is a way that you can perhaps begin to do that. Misha, can you just talk us through your most recent written work? What kind of got you inspired?
Well, it's not my most recent, I'll be honest, but I think this one inspired me the most. I've done a piece on the Manhood Academy, and they're like an organisation that started off in North London. They now have a branch in West London, and they also have a Womanhood Academy too now. So they've grown, but at the time where I met them, it was just in passing. A friend had asked me to go to an event, and then at the end of the event, there was an opportunity to walk into this launch. So we sort of fell into it, and it was amazing. The most amazing launch of a project I've ever been in. There were drums playing, the vibe was just electric in the building. And anyway, they went on to explain what they're about, and basically in response to stereotypes and knife crime rates in the London area, they wanted to do work with boys. And there were a group of 8 black men who all had a career in teaching, and they wanted to use a sort of an African cultural solution to a London-based problem, and that's called rites of passage. And they talked you through how they would take our young boys through rites of passage in order to be a more preventative measure from becoming that journey to bridge that gap into manhood that a lot of boys found difficult. It was really fascinating. So I took the idea to the Guardian, and they loved it, and they was like, right, and they give me the brief. And I find this happens because it's very hard to get a successful pitch anyway. And when it does, I get sort of imposter syndrome. I'm like, oh my God, how am I going to do it? How am I going to do it to their brief? I must make it perfect. Oh my God, what questions shall I ask? And I go from really believing in myself to thinking, oh my God, what if I do it and they hate it, on both sides, the editor and the source. So I sort of go into a frenzy, but then I try to calm myself to the initial stage of that belief, and I just concentrate that energy into research and all of this. So I met the sources and asked them a heap of questions, and I sensed, as a bit of an empath, I sensed a bit of a disconnect. So I thought, do you know what? In the middle of the interview, I thought, do you know what? Drop all this like learned behavior and stuff. Let's just have a conversation. And in that, I really realized that this is where we're going wrong, particularly in the newsroom as well. We're standing in this sort of elitist position. I'm the reporter. I'm going to tell your story. Now tell me what I need to know. Here's my questions. Tell me what I need to know. And it comes back to what Polly said about, sort of having that connection and that trust with the people that you work with. And it's really important because you uncover more that way as well. And people really tell you and give you the vulnerabilities that they wouldn't normally offer up. And I think it's in those vulnerabilities that we find connections between us humans, like our common humanity. So I dropped it all and I said to him, do you know what? This is your project and it's amazing. And the Guardian think it's great and they want to hear about it. But I want you to tell me what you want to put out there. Like, how do you want it to be seen? And I allowed him to take over a little bit, not entirely, because at the end of the day, I'm going to write it up. So I still have my place. But he had his in that, actually, it's your story. You tell me what's beautiful about it. You tell me what's difficult about it, and tell me your experience of it. Because there was this mistrust as well when I approached him to do an article. Oh, I would love it, but oh, you're a journalist. There's this suspicion with journalists and that we haven't got the best intentions, and that goes from offering up your story sometimes, and then you're rubbished with a horrible headline and something that doesn't really reflect who you are, in the mix of rushing to get a story out and sort of helicopter parachuting in and then parachuting out instead of taking time with your source. So that's what motivates me, and that experience in that interview changed my method in a way, continuing. And I think I will continue that subjective sort of interview method in the future, because it really helped me gain trust with my sources and actually ended up getting a better result because of it.
That's really interesting, Michelle, because I feel like you've spoken about both sides of one about getting a job as a journalist and the barriers that you face there, but then once you're a journalist, how you find the stories and gain the trust, because actually you only get paid. I mean, I used to be able to do stories over, you'd go somewhere for a week at least, and now if you get sent somewhere, it's for 2 minutes. So how you have the time to sort of build that trust and also to research the stories that are harder to find, because otherwise you just have the same people with the loudest voices telling their stories. So I feel like it's really interesting you sort of told both sides of that.
I entered a minority writers competition with the Guardian. They wanted a piece on the future of journalism and how the digital age, will we survive it and stuff. So I wrote that, and I won a place to then meet the editors. That was the prize. You can come, go around the headquarters for the day, meet the editors, pitch an idea. So it could have then just stopped there. Do you know what I mean? And just been that experience. But I'm sort of try to throw myself into that experience because I knew it might never happen again. And I just made an effort to work my way around the room and took all the editors' email addresses, because there was an editor from every single desk of the Guardian. So I managed to get all their emails, even if I didn't have an idea for them that day. And then I just pitched my one idea, which they took on, which is a more personal story. My first ever article was a personal story of what you know, what it's like to be a disabled parent to be at the time. And so following that, I just kept in contact really, and just anytime I got an idea, I'd just email them. And every so often, you know, the people would change, and I'll just go online and see who's the commissioning editor for that desk. Twitter's really good for that, to track people down, and then just keep being a nuisance. I find works. So yeah, that's how I do it.
I started in exactly the same way, Michelle. After I went to UEL, I went to LCP at the time, London College of Printing, and I won Young Photographer of the Year at the Guardian. And then that was a week's work experience at the Guardian. Worked really hard that week, and then they kept hiring me for a bit. Like you say, I think then just trying to keep going and to keep contact is really important. But yeah, competitions are really helpful.
You know, for me, kind of like what to say. So after the film that I did, you know, I went in Esthetica magazine to university. Really what happened is that I was at Shoreditch House having a drink with a friend, and I saw these two beautiful black women sitting on the bar, and I was like, oh my God, I must tell them, they're absolutely stunning. So I went up to them and I told them, and you know, began to chat, and they were both producers. And they basically, we kept in contact. They were like, oh, you should definitely come to this meeting of like pop creative. And, you know, I was like, okay, why not? So I went to this meeting, and there were like people working from Paul's Films to, I don't know, to Nowness, to The Guardian, to The Sun, to The Times, whatever. There were a bit of everything in there. And I showed my film, and yeah, and then from there, like there were also directors from production design, production companies. And from there, really, everything really started. So thanks, Shoreditch House, I guess. Oh, good days.